Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome along to Real Israel and our latest edition of What the Israeli Papers Say. This is Paul Alster here with you, once again returning to look at the stories that have been making the news here in Israel over the last week. And I'm delighted to say we've got two terrific guests this week. And first of all, Peter Lerner joins us, a retired IDF Lieutenant Colonel, and the former, of course, IDF spokesperson, now Director General of the International Relations at the Histadrut-General Federation of Labor in Israel. It's quite a title, Peter, but it's wonderful to have you with us.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here again. Thank you.
It's good to have you back, as it is Rami Lador, who, of course, is the ex-vice president of the international division of Bank Hapoalim, one of Israel's very biggest banks. That was in the Southeast Asia division. He also spent quite a number of years representing the bank in the United States. And since retirement, he has been very active in the campaign, highlighting the corruption issues here in Israel. So, Rami, thank you once again for joining us here at Real Israel.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we've got a lot to look at here. There's been so much going on, guys, over the last week. But the story that has made the international headlines is the slaying of the brains behind Iran's nuclear program. Now, this, of course, a very, very significant issue. Nobody has officially attributed it directly to Israel, but there's a lot of assumption that Israel was at the very least involved. I'm going to come to you first, Peter, because, of course, this is an area in which, speaking about Iran and the threat that it poses, you have a great deal of experience. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the overview of a story that's been reported across the local media by the likes of Israel Hayom and Haaretz that will be showing on screen. There's a lot about this story, isn't there?
Well, of course, it is a substantial story for the stability of the region. I think if the biggest issue over the last 10 years that has been the driving force of Israel's national security is the Iranian nuclear program. This guy, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, is the mastermind or the puzzle maker, the man that actually puts all of the pieces together. And I think this is the importance of him actually being removed and assassinated, as was reported last week or over the weekend. But I think when I look at this issue, it's important to look around several components of the actual act of assassination and what actually has happened since then. And I think what we have seen is a plethora of disinformation across the board. I mean, every other day there is a different sequence of what happened. It began with 12 assassins versus 4 bodyguards to create this atmosphere of action of heroism. The second report was a story of automatic rifle controlled from a distance, some sort of high-tech technology, which was supposedly Israeli technology. And last night I heard that it was even a drone attack. So there's so much smoke around this story. It's really very hard to know what happened and who actually did it. I think another component was, which was very interesting seeing it in Israel, was the knee-jerk response that Israelis had when the Iranians released pictures of suspects. Everybody was looking at the websites and the newspapers saying, is this my neighbor? Is this somebody I know? Who are these people? And it's quite an interesting discourse. You know, everybody's saying, I know this guy. He's so familiar. I mean, he could be my the guy that lives next door or whoever. But we don't know, obviously. But it's an interesting issue of debate. And I think the last two components, which are probably the most important, what is actually going to be the ramifications, both on a local level? Will there be a response? How it will happen? Will it be localized? Will it be contained? Or will it be something that will create a much larger ignition of the region? And on a global level of politics, what will it mean with regard to President-elect Joe Biden and his relation vis-a-vis Iran and the Iranian nuclear program? So we have a lot to see of this one event that took less than 3 minutes to carry out physically. It probably was months and months of planning, whoever conducted it. But this event obviously is going to have a huge footprint on whatever happens within the region and beyond.
And just, Peter, as a kind of a supplementary question, do you believe there's any coincidence in the fact that this slaying took place before the end of the Trump presidency, given his views on Iran in the region?
So we don't know who did it, but definitely the person, the organization, the body, the action that was conducted, if it was indeed conducted, because there are all different types of conspiracy theories that it was actually there was no assassination carried out. All different types of conspiracy theories. But if it was indeed carried out by a state actor, definitely that was a component in the decision-making process. How do you take off major players on the chessboard before something strategic major happens? And he was a strategic player in the nuclear program, a program which is completely targeted to reinforce Iran's regional position and global position, and especially threaten the state of Israel, as they keep saying time and time again. So we won't miss him for sure. And it is definitely something that the state of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu named him specifically when he revealed the nuclear archive of Iran just a couple of years ago. And he was specifically named, and I think he was the only one that was specifically named. So Fakhrizadeh will not be missed by us. In the Iranian setup, for sure he will be missed. And as I said, this is the guy that puts all of the pieces of puzzle together on the table in order to see, because the way their nuclear program is set up, it's all dispersed information, and he was the hub of control.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you on that just a little bit way down the line, but I want to come to Rami here, because speaking just as a citizen of Israel, when you see these acts being carried out, Rami, whether or not it was Israel, we don't know for sure. What sort of a feeling does it give you? A feeling of impending doom, that we could be drawn into some sort of action, or a feeling that the right thing to do was done because this was a guy that was up to no good?
The speculation who did it is very, very interesting. It makes good headlines and good newspaper readings, but it doesn't really matter. And I look more who is to gain from the assassination. And I think it was very much cleared by everyone in the West practically that we all have to gain from the slowing down of the Iranian nuclear program. Having said that, I want to say another thing about the timing, whether it's related or not related to the American change of in the White House. And I think the Iranians do not really need a provocation in order to start an activity, wartime activity against Israel. I think if they thought they could do something, they wouldn't wait for something to start a provocation. They have all the intention, all the declarations that they want to destroy Israel. So I think the timing doesn't really matter if it's now, a week from now, or a year from now. If the Iranians would feel they can hurt Israel and somehow change their Israel's power in the region, I think they don't need to wait for that. As far as the guy himself, it's very, very interesting to see how it's done. I personally get the feeling that it's a cooperation between many, many secret agents and authorities, not just Israel, if Israel at all.
Well, I'm not sure we'll ever know the truth of exactly who did it, but the result of what happened is plain for all to see. But just coming back to you, Peter, I was interested.
Let me say something cynical, if I can.
Oh, go on then, Rami. We like cynicism.
Be sure that Netanyahu will leak it when it suits his own personal needs.
Well, that remains to be seen. But just coming to you, Peter, here. Very shortly after the assassination was reported, I was watching Sky News, and their defense correspondent and intelligence, very well-respected, Alistair Bunkle. He's a good journalist with good sources very often. I wonder if you agree with his initial reaction to what happened, which was that wiping out this guy is one thing, but as far as he was aware, Alistair Bunkle, he understood that the framework had been set up in such a way because the guy knew he had a target on his back for a long time, so that if he was anything untoward was to happen to him, like falling in front of a bus or disappearing off the edge of a cliff by accident on purpose, the whole apparatus that he had set up would still continue undisturbed. Now, was Bunkel right or wrong about that? Do you think it is a major issue that the guy is no longer there and will set Iran back?
Everything that I've seen and heard and spoken to in the last week since it happened points to the fact that it was much more substantial than just somebody that if you remove him from the table, it doesn't really mean much. I think there is a lot of, first of all, the symbolism of taking out such a senior person in the hierarchy in the Iranian war machine is, just in itself, it's a huge feat. It has, it sends this, if this is the top guy in our nuclear program and we can't protect him, what does it mean about everything else? And on the second component, I would actually say, as I said, it's okay that the way that their nuclear program is dispersed throughout Iran, it comes back to this hub of control, and he was the head of the hub of control. So the way their nuclear program has been reported over the years, whether it's from UN missions or from intelligence organizations around the world, it's a dispersed organization. Lots of field intelligence, security, maintaining the core secrets. So there, you can probably say most of the information was dispersed between lots and lots of people, but very few people actually had the entire picture. He was one of the very few people.
And he is no more. So we're going to leave this first story. I am absolutely certain there'll be more revelations over the coming weeks, more theories, more conspiracies. Who knows? It could go in all sorts of directions, but we'll watch with interest. Now, I'm going to move on to the second story, which we're going to show some of the reporting on screen that's come through the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel. And as many people who watch us regularly will know, and as people who follow the events here in Israel will know, our Prime Minister is under investigation on 3 different affairs. But the one that he isn't currently being investigated for is the issue to do with the submarines and the sale of submarines and so on. Now, Rami, this is a very, very complicated issue. I know that, but I know a lot of people demonstrating on the streets in Israel are highlighting the fact that they believe there's more to this than has met the eye. So just a few thoughts from you on the situation as regards the submarine investigation or lack of it.
This is the thing that many consider the biggest corruption issue. Corruption that has to do with security of Israel issue since the beginning of the state, because it has to do with the most expensive, the most sophisticated, and the most needed weapon that Israel has, the submarines that are made in Germany. There have been many questions about the way the decision was taken to purchase the submarines from Germany, mainly why from Germany, was there a bid contract, the way the regulations call for, who was involved in decision making, and the questions have been united into one very complex petition by the Movement for Quality Government, which had formed something like 140 pages to the Bagatz, the Israeli High Court of Justice. And along those 140 pages were about 40 different affidavits by the highest members of Israel's security, not forces, but security people, from the Ministry of Defense to the Israeli Mossad. And the heads of these security forces all have come up with issues that are not clear, that need to be investigated. Now, there have actually been 6 indictments that are waiting just for a hearing, a pre-hearing of people involved with the purchase of the submarines. However, nobody has touched the issue of Netanyahu's own personal dealings or relations with the decision-making. And whenever things were investigated, it only became more blur what his part was. Who knew? Did he consult the right authorities within the Ministry of Security, within the IDF? And just to give you one example of how complicated it is, the High Court of Justice asked the Movement for Quality Government, please narrow your petition from 140 pages to 60 pages because it's too much for us. Okay, and that's going to be done in a few weeks. I don't know when the final deadline is, just to get an idea of what is happening, how the decisions were made.
So essentially, Rami, the court is asking for the Movement for Quality Government to put the case in a nutshell, just to go to the core of the issue, and on that they will decide whether or not there's a case to be answered.
That, and then the affidavit is attached to the petition, of course, and with a major hurdle, that is, the Attorney General, Mandelblit, already said that there's nothing to investigate. Everything that needed to be investigated relating to Netanyahu was investigated. Just one point about one of the issues that all of us do not understand. When Germany requested Israel's permission or approval to sell sophisticated submarines to Egypt, it was a decision that was supposed to be made by the entire elite of Israel's security forces, and nobody knew about it except Netanyahu and two people who are not really related to the actual decision process. And we want to have answers for that. We want to know why he decided by himself to sell. There's, of course, some sort of suspicion. Did he or did any of his relatives or his friends make a little bit of money?
A bit of profit on the side. Well, we'll come to that in a moment. I'm going to ask Peter about this, your view on this, and just the concerns of the security and the military establishment around this whole affair.
So I would actually point to four core issues that relate to the entire affair from beginning to end. First of all, it's primarily a defense issue. Do we actually need these submarines? And I think this is the question that still remains unasked. Who made this decision and why? What is the threat assessment that requires these additional submarines to the Israeli fleet? As Rami rightly pointed out, all of the defense officials, from the former defense minister Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, who was in the position in 2016 when this whole thing took place, he didn't know about it. So who is the decision maker? Who determines if there is a need in the defense mechanism? The second component is actually the procedure. Okay, if we've contemplated the need for buying, acquiring additional weaponry, whether it's submarines or aircraft or aircraft carriers, for the sake of it. Okay, what is the procedure of actually going around that? What is the strategic threat? How much money are we willing to spend? Is the German model the best model that we can buy for our money? And so on and so on. And then how do you create the support systems that will facilitate the decision-making process? The third one is, the third point that I want to point out on this is the politics around it. Now, the Attorney General has made his decision that Netanyahu isn't implicated, but there are those that are implicated, namely his cousin, David Shimron, who is also his lawyer, former chief of staff, David Sharan. So there are people that have been implicated for unlawful acts in this case. So it goes to show that the politics played probably is the reason why Benny Gantz actually decided to establish his own commission to inquire on the first 2 points, the defense and the procedure. Who do we actually need these? And if we do, then how do we actually proceed in the case? And I would say Gantz's activity came a little too late in the chain reaction. He received the office of Minister of Defense, I believe, and I think it's one of the first things he should have done. If it's a professional issue that we need to discuss professionally, then why connect it to the politics of this country, which are in themselves going crazy and very hard to follow? And the final component, which I believe is the most important, is the issue of norms versus criminal activities. And we have to set a standard, especially in issues of defense and national defense, of what we actually want. I'm not talking about necessarily issues of conflict of interest or profiteering on basis of what we've seen in this case. But what are the norms we expect from our elected officials when it comes to defending the state of Israel? And if my cousin is involved in buying these submarines, who should know about it? So we have to demand a lot from our elected officials. Unfortunately, in this case, it appears there are too many red flags that have been raised.
I would like to add to Peter's fourth point, if possible, and that is there's one complicated issue here, is that the investigation committee that Gantz is forming is going to check procedures. And it can very well be that the decisions were right decisions, whether you need a sixth submarine, whether it's okay for Israel's defense to approve submarines to Egypt, or whether it's okay to have 4 SAR 6 boats made in Germany at 2,000 tons rather than in South Korea. It might be the right decision. However, the question that concerns me, and what I demonstrated, and I feel many Israelis demonstrated, whether those decisions within the range of what is legitimate for decision, whether the decision was made according to the private interest of the people who made those decisions and not the national interest. Because even if a right decision was made, but made for the wrong personal reasons of the prime minister, that needs to be investigated. And I want to add one more short point, which is the biggest one for me. Even if everything's okay, and Netanyahu is 100% clear because there's nothing to investigate because there was nothing wrong, which is just saying, even if so, half the country don't believe him. Just don't believe him. So just to quiet the half country down, why don't Netanyahu himself go to 8 o'clock newscast tonight and say, I demand an investigation. I do not want to have this sort of shadow over my legacy. My legacy is too important to have half the country, including all those generals and the ministers of defense, having some sort of a doubt of my integrity. What are we talking? He is the one who should request that, demand that.
Well, I think you may have to wait quite a while for that particular thing to happen. There's just one other point. Maybe, Peter, you can give me a view on this, which is something Benjamin Weinthal, who's a regular contributor here, made when we spoke about this last, and that is that the German company ThyssenKrupp that has sold the submarines, including to Egypt, is partially owned, a small part of it, by Iran. And apropos the first story, surely there should have been red flags about us buying submarines off a company that has investment from Iran. What's going on there?
Well, there's a historic relationship, and many of our vessels, they all go through the German process and together, and it's part of the defense agreements between the two countries. I'm sure the people who are involved in this thought process know. Obviously, they know about the ownership, but at the end of the day, you have to try and maximize your defense capabilities and minimize your threats. And this was a calculated decision. The vessels, for the amount of the Navy, I don't know if you actually know, it is one of the smallest units of the IDF. On par with probably a small brigade or so. So it's a small, but it needs to be as strong and capable with the top-notch technology and stealth capabilities and all of the activities that submarines can do at a distance. So you need to go through the process and try and find what best suits you, and then calculate the risk, because Iran is everywhere over the world.
Well, you mentioned while you were speaking about the second story of the situation with the political turmoil going on here in Israel. Now, last night it became almost certain that the government is going to collapse and we could be going to elections. Now, one party that stands potentially to be wiped out, and this is very hard to imagine, really, for people that have grown up with the vision of the State of Israel as we knew it as youngsters and going forward, and that is the Labour Party, the party of Ben Gurion and of Golda Meir and Yitzhak Rabin. It may not make get enough votes in order to pass the minimum threshold and could disappear into oblivion. And obviously, Peter, your organisation has connections to the Labour organisation. How are you viewing what is potentially going to happen, and do you believe that Labour will find a way to survive this fourth round of elections?
Well, I certainly hope so. The Histadrut today has no connections with any of the political parties as such. We're not affiliated, as in the past, with the Labour Party. The Histadrut today, we have all of the political parties in government basically are represented within the Histadrut. But the Labour Party, I think, represents much more than the David Ben Gurion, the Golda Meir. I think what they tried to present over the years, and they're struggling over recent years, is what is it to have a social democratic party in Israel? And it's a message that doesn't seem to be resonating on Israeli ears. We are in the times of telepoliticians, or tweeting politicians, and they aren't able to compete, or they haven't been able to compete in recent years, definitely not with the trends of these messiah generals that come in, like Benny Gantz, like Gabi Ashkenazi. You have Yair Lapid, a television persona, and of course Netanyahu, who runs rings around everybody from a political stance. So you have the Labour Party struggling for its place on our political spectrum. It'll be interesting to see, because it's not over yet. The latest issue that happened in the party was Amir Peretz and Itzik Shmuli, the leader of the party and one of the prominent members of Knesset, who is also a minister. They brought forward a proposal that the party would now no longer be managed by all of its members, 40 or so thousand members, and only by a select group of leaders within the party, or about 3,000 or 4,000. So it's doing they're in relation to the global, the national trends of how political parties are being run here. Less representative, less democratic. I think it's a shame for the Labour Party. But it goes in line with what's happened. And Amir Peretz, his explanation was, I have to relate to what's happening in the national trends here in Israel. I think to a lot of, a third of the representatives that were brought, that this suggestion was brought to them, they objected to it. So it will go through the legal process. There is a court procedure. The decision of this change of process actually needs an approval from all of the members. And I don't think this is being led by the third member of Knesset, Merav Michaeli. I don't think that the majority of the members of the Labour Party here will actually support Amir Peretz in his endeavor to embolden his own power within the party. It's very interesting. The question is, will it be a final nail in the coffin of Israel's Labour Party? As I said, I definitely hope not.
And Rami, whether or not you vote Labour, having a balance in the political spectrum in Israel surely is healthy for democracy. If Labour do disappear, whether or not you support them, I wonder what direction the country is going to continue to go in. Is there anything that's ever going to anchor the country and stop it from drifting further and further to the right?
I'm actually also very sad for what is happening in the labor movement, in the Labour Party. And there are some inherent faults with the way of thinking of the people who voted Labour, and that is they always change their leader. They cannot stick with the leader of the party for more than a minimum term, and the first time something goes wrong, they want to change it. And there's been so many leaders of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party leaders, when they get knocked down, then they join another party. So the record there of leaders is very, very poor. Yet Israel needs the Labour Party. It really does, because Kahol Lavan and Yair Lapid are both very much central. We need something that's a strong, ideological, socialist.
There is Meretz, of course, by the way, for people that don't know, Rami, just to say there is Meretz, which is a left-wing party sort of further left than Labour. Now, that probably will survive, which says something, not that we're totally anti the left-wing politics, but just that the Labour Party is doing something very wrong.
You're very right, other than the fact that Meretz has a glass ceiling of it being very extreme and radical, and it's sort of like a Bernie Sanders. Can someone like Bernie Sanders ever win the majority of the votes? And Meretz is wonderful, but we need a Labour Party, and I would personally, even though I don't vote for Labour, be very sad to not see Labour in the Knesset.
And thanks to the dog for barking its approval as well on the subject. We take all the support we can get. Peter, just to say that as far as the Labour Party goes, they seem to have ditched or sidelined many of the people that are considered, even in the mainstream or even those centre to right, as being the strongest politicians, people like Stav Shafir and Shelley Yachimowicz, who was a very significant. Do you think Labour just seems to be on a course bent on self-destruction? Also, the fact that they entered into the coalition, which many people were very, very uncomfortable with them sitting alongside Netanyahu and the religious parties.
So my sense is, the political arena. I don't think they could have actually given up on actually going into the government. They had to try and maximize their abilities. But like Benny Gantz, everybody seemed to be enchanted by the Netanyahu wizardry. And when you look at the Labour Party where it's going, this could definitely. Rami was right in saying how the leadership, the inability for maintaining a long, strong built leadership. And Shelley Yachimowicz is a perfect example, as you pointed out, as the head of the party, but the party seems to devour itself from within, with the inability to actually produce new leadership, to produce younger leadership, when you look at all of the polling carried out in the country, the ideals that the Labour Party represent are generally widely accepted and agreed upon, that this is the way the country should be going. But leadership aren't able to take it to the next level. They aren't able to deliver, and in this day and age where you have the politicians that come and promise and make promises and then get elected into positions and don't deliver, there's just a lot of fatigue and frustration with how the party is going. I really hope that they'll be able to find some sort of magic to get out of the situation where they are. Otherwise, they might not necessarily be in the next Knesset. But you know what? Maybe that's what the party actually needs. They need a wake-up call for sure.
Well, in the next few days, we'll find out exactly if the government is going to be dissolved and if we are going to elections. And maybe that will allow people to come together and bang heads together. As I say, whether or not you support the Labour Party, I think from a historical perspective and from the good of democracy, I think it's very important for them to be around in some form or other. But as the clock is ticking, I'm going to move on to what's going to have to be our final story today, which is a story that Rami, I'm sure, will have something to say on, because it's about the continuing nationwide protests against the government, and it's across a number of different subjects. And I look at you, Rami. You are a guy who was a senior figure in an Israeli bank. You're one of the men in suits. You're one of the people, part of the establishment, what a lot of people would say to a great extent, and yet you are out there protesting against the government. How is it that somebody who spent their lifetime representing Israel and Israeli interests through commerce and banking is out there with such a wide range of people? Do you think you are typical of the type of person who has now got to the point where they are saying no more, we've got to do something to change?
That's a good question, because there's two parts to my being part of the demonstration. One is just a personal release. I finally got to say what I really think about issues because when I was representing a big bank in Israel, in Hong Kong or United States, I was very, very careful to appear not controversial, to say the least. Diplomatic, not controversial. And so for me, it's a release that I can speak out and I can write whatever I want within the freedom of speech that we have here. But the second part is something that's a lot more important to me. When you go to those demonstrations, you see a lot of people, a lot of young people, a lot of diversified background people, a lot of people that might even vote Likud, might vote Meretz, and everybody together forming the half of the country at least that say, hey, we want to live in a better country that's managed or governed by people who we can trust. So when you go to these demonstrations, you get such a hype feeling that we're doing it. Sort of, I don't know, my age is one that I can compare it to Woodstock. Okay, you didn't know what, but you knew something was happening. This Saturday night in Balfour, the night before the continuation of Netanyahu's court, all of the the protest movements, all of them are getting together to go to Balfour and then say in a very, very loud voice, we want to change the country. We want this country to be what it ought to be. And it has not been in the last year with the 3 elections and now the 4 elections. We just want a better Israel, and we know we're good enough to achieve it, to get to it.
But that all said, it's all very commendable, and I'm sure it gives you a good feeling when you're out there venting your feelings. But is it making a difference, Rami? Do you think anything is going to change, or is it just a little passage of time where people will come out and demonstrate, but nothing will actually change? Do you get the feeling that there is an undercurrent of change going on?
It's a good question whether it will make a difference. So first of all, yes, it's making a difference for me, the way I feel, the way I sit with my grandchildren at Friday night dinner, assuming there's no corona limitations, okay? That makes a big, big difference. But according to studies, and I don't know if it's true, the minute the protests can get to 2.5% of the country's population, then it's all over for Netanyahu. If we can get 200,000 people, 250,000 people in one big demonstration, then it's a point of no return for the current regime. I hope this will happen. But as I said, the reason I'm going, because it makes me feel that I'm doing my duty.
Okay, so you're exercising your right in a democracy to say what you feel needs to be said. Peter, from first of all, an official point of view, as far as the Histadrut goes, do they have a position on the demonstrations? Do they support them? Do they get involved, or do they leave it to people's individual choices?
No, the Histadrut hasn't taken an official position on the demonstrations. Of course, we believe that it's a basic civil right to demonstrate, to protest, but no, there's no beyond that. We haven't taken a stance on that. I think, though, and I relate, definitely connect to a lot of what Rami has said. I think we have seen, the biggest challenge of the protest, the weekly protest, 22, 23. The problem is it just another number in the line and series of protests? And then there's the actions that create, the dilemma between what do I have to do in order to get noticed about the protest. So you have all different types of things that lead to arrests, and different types of things. You have a demonstrator equating between Netanyahu and Adolf Hitler, and I think that there definitely need to be red lines. I think getting people out in masses is important. I personally don't believe that it can actually change. Netanyahu, like him or not, he had the majority. He won the elections. It's important to protest against your grievances and how you feel when he's not delivering the goods from a civilian perspective, and when he's not succeeding in or delivering the promises that he promised. But he basically is shrugging them off from the beginning, and I don't believe that it is even shifting his position a bit. I think it might even be serving his political internal agenda within the right. to a certain extent, and he definitely tried to manipulate it by calling the people that are expressing their civic right anarchists on one extent, and then you had people saying that they are distributing the coronavirus. All different types of things like that. So he tried to utilize the demonstrations for his benefit, and a lot of people actually believe that that's the case. I hope that the demonstrations can continue. I do believe that there needs to be red lines in the types of things that are said and projected. We have to keep issues of gender and anytime you use any sort of example of trying to equate between Israel and Nazism is a very, very sensitive topic. And these are the types of things that we need to be extremely careful for. But, if we're going into the fourth election, so maybe they have helped in a certain way in bringing civilian discontent with the status quo. And will it change something? I don't necessarily believe it will, but we can hope so.
Well, one thing we can say is that we're one of the few countries in the region where the democratic right to demonstrate is still there and normally passes off without any significant violence, whereas in other parts of the region, those people that do feel they want to demonstrate, particularly going back to the first story in Iran, it's very often a matter of life and death, as we saw with the situation of their champion wrestler just a month or two ago, which was an absolute disgrace and a terrible travesty of justice. But we're just about out of time. In recent weeks, we've been asking our guests to kind of direct our viewers to a place in Israel that is somewhere that they enjoy in particular, that's slightly off the beaten track. I'm going to put forward another one from my collection, which is Muhraka, which is the monastery near Daliat El Carmel, which is a wonderful place to visit, a very famous spot for biblical reasons. But if you go there, not only is there a very pretty but simple church, but also you're able to go up onto the roof of the church and see across the whole of the Jezreel Valley to places as far as Nazareth and beyond, and also across towards Beit Shan, and even on a clear day on the coast as far as Netanya. It's an absolutely spectacular spot that is well worth a visit, in my view. Rami, I'll ask you first. What would you suggest as a place that people should take a look at next time they're here?
If you go all the way down to Eilat, about 4 kilometers north of the border at Taba with Egypt in the Sinai, you get to a unique place that exists only in Israel. It's called a dolphin reef. And there's a lot of dolphin shows all over the world. But the dolphin reef in Eilat is very, very unique because you get to swim with the dolphins, you get to scuba dive with them, you get to be in the best of atmosphere of the Red Sea, the beautiful Red Sea, with the one thing that no other dolphin site has. The dolphins, which are what do they call, the bottlenose dolphins, are free to come and go as they please from the site. So it's really a nature green type of resort that every time I go to Eilat, I go to the dolphin reef, or the other way around. I go to Eilat because I want to be a day or two at the dolphin reef.
Well, it's somewhere that I've always wanted to get involved with, but I can't swim. So that's a problem for me, but it's a wonderful thing. The kids have done it. They love it. What about you, Peter? What would you suggest?
So I'm going to take full opportunity and, push forward the Histadrut. This year we are celebrating 100 years since the establishment of the Histadrut. And for the first time in 53 years since our building was established in the heart of Tel Aviv, we opened a park which is open to Tel Aviv, to all of Tel Aviv. So it was actually off of the beaten track because nobody could go in. It was closed to the public and it was completely closed off. Today, this year, we are just last month, we opened the park to the general public. We invested in it. We welcome it. And, it is lovely. We have kids here all the time. There's a place to get coffee. We have Wi-Fi. There's a library here, although books only in Hebrew at the time. But you know what? Maybe we can get some English books as well. So there's so much. It's an urban park in the heart of Tel Aviv. That there is hardly any parks like this in Tel Aviv today. So I would suggest come and have a cup of coffee and enjoy yourself.
And what's the name of the park? Is it the Histadrut Park? Or
Histadrut Park, yes. Histadrut
Park. Okay, so people can find it there. Well, on that note, that's a very good plug, Peter, but it ties in very, very nicely as well with the whole topic, and a place very much, I'm sure, that's going to be worth visiting in the center of Tel Aviv. I want to thank you, Peter, and Rami, both for your contribution this week. It's been another really fascinating discussion with some serious topics, and I want to thank you all as well for joining us. And of course, we'll be back with more next time here at What the Israeli Papers Say at Real Israel. So from me, Paul Alster, for now, I wish you a very good afternoon, and look forward to you joining us again next time. Bye-bye for now.